Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinmolere. At the weekend, Chelsea overcame their biggest test yet under Enzo Maresca, and they did it in style. The 4-3 win away at their bitter rivals Tottenham has seen them go up to second in the Premier League. So, are Chelsea back? And are they real title contenders? All right. With me for this one, we've got Phil Hay, as well as our Chelsea writer, Liam Twomey, who's also with us as well. Liam, let's start with this, right? A quote from your recent article basically states, "Nothing says we've got our Chelsea back more than beating Tottenham on their pitch and bantering them off in the process." Now, take us into your life when they played Tottenham on Sunday. You know, the reaction from Enzo Maresca, the fans, and the feeling in general around the Chelsea camp.
Yeah, so first, that piece was built around the words, "We've got our Chelsea back," which is what the Chelsea away fans sang as they were beating Southampton 5-1. And it felt quite dangerous. It felt quite shocking that they would sing it, first off, given how kind of nascent this revival still is. But it also felt quite dangerous with this Tottenham game on the horizon. But then when they sang it again at Tottenham Stadium after they'd completed the comeback, it really felt like they believed it, and this is a real thing. And it was clear in the stadium just how much that win meant to everyone of a Chelsea persuasion. Like Maresca, the way he celebrated at the final whistle, he turned back to his bench, he kind of bent his legs, screamed at the sky, he had both fists pumped at his sides, and then he had a big group huddle hug with his backroom staff. I've seen him celebrate other wins, but nothing quite like that. He was quite keen to, play it down in his post-match press conference. Understandably, I don't think it is our biggest win. We go day by day, all of this kind of coach speak, but if you judge by his body language, his actions in the game, I think it sent quite a different message. And the players as well, the way they were celebrating the third and fourth goals and the way they celebrated afterwards going up to the fans. And it does feel like something is building here. We don't really know what the limits of it are. We don't know where it can go this season. But Chelsea finally, you can say quite confidently, are on a real upward trajectory again.
Yeah, I guess it's that optimism that's really interesting for me right now, watching Chelsea play in the Premier League, and also the fans' reaction to the play. But I guess that optimism also has to be caveated by the fact that, it's taken a while before we got here with Chelsea. Just take us back a little bit as to understand just how far the club has regressed over the last few years. And I think we were just talking about it just before the podcast. This is a very new type of Chelsea that fans are trying to get used to as well.
It's a completely new club. It's almost entirely new personnel on and off the pitch. The squad has been overhauled. Every department off the pitch has been overhauled. On the football side, on the commercial side, there's clearly new ownership with very different ideas of how Chelsea should run. And there's been a lot of pain over the last 2 years while all that change has been happening. And Chelsea have been a laughingstock because they've been in a position where they've been outspending everyone else while finishing in mid-table in the Premier League. I mean, their 12th place finish in 2022-23, that's Chelsea's worst domestic performance this century. Worse even than 2015-16. Well, It's worth remembering that even before Abramovich came in 2003, they were already like a top 6 Premier League club. So this was something that entire generations of Chelsea fans had not experienced. And I think that did affect the mood in stadiums, also online, the way fans were interpreting results, performances, the general direction of things. And it's taken a long time for it to become clear that things are slowly heading in the right direction. I think if you paid attention last year, particularly in the last few months, it was pretty obvious that a team, or at least a core of players, was coming together. That there was something to be excited about beyond just Cole Palmer, who I'm sure we'll talk plenty about.
We have to at some point.
But it was clear that progress was being made under Mauricio Pochettino, and then the decision to mutually part ways I know that phrase has been thrown around quite a lot in the last week.
Does anyone mutually say goodbye,
I think that kind of reset things or set things back in terms of the fan mood going into this season. They really didn't know what to make of Maresca, what to make of the judgment of the people who'd hired him. It's still relatively early days, but I think Maresca's been nothing but impressive in the job so far, and that reflects well on the process to hire him, the bold decision to part with Pochettino. And it really has built on the foundations that were laid last year, and now Chelsea are kind of back to a more recognisable level of competing in the Premier League.
Yeah, Phil, I mean, I think I'm going to have to eat a little bit of humble pie right now because I don't know. I've always been sceptical about what's been going on at Chelsea, and also, so many managers have come through the door in a short period of time. But look at them now, second in the table, 31 points after 15 games, or from 15 games, I should say. From your perspective, are you surprised by how quickly Maresca has got them playing decent football? And, they're doing well attacking. I mean, there are issues for sure, but I mean, this looks like a serious side right now.
Well, listen, I mean, the intro to today's newsletter says we laughed at the exorbitant transfer fees and the 9-year contracts, and we laughed at the stories about players having to change in the corridors at the training ground because there was no room in the dressing room. Yes, frankly, with Maresca, I am surprised, not because it's him. I mean, I was one of the people who thought Maresca did a very, very good job at Leicester, and I do totally accept that his squad was worth more, in monetary terms than just about every other squad in the division. It was a team that should have been there for automatic promotion, should really have been good enough to win the title. But I don't think you can discount the pressure that comes on when you have, essentially zero leeway at a club. Maresca was never going to get away with a mixed or a poor season at Leicester. It had to be good at the first time of asking. And it was his first job in England, first managerial job, first job in the Championship as well, which is not an easy league even when you've got a big budget. And at no point did he really seem rattled. There was a stage around about Easter or before Easter where it got a bit dicey for Leicester, and they had to grit their teeth and they had to get through it, but they did. And I think looking back now, it's quite notable that Chelsea went really quickly for him in the summer. Once Pochettino left, and once it was, as Liam put it, kind of mutually agreed that he would go, they seemed absolutely set on Maresca as their man. It was really difficult, and I always go back to the conversation the three of us had in the summer, the podcast we did then. It was really difficult to predict where this was going to go, and I think the reason for that was I wasn't certain if Maresca was going to get himself in the building and be able to have the sort of clarity of thought that he clearly has had, to be able to look at what is a very big and still, quite bloated squad, and figure out, clearly what is the strongest 11 from this? What is the best match day squad to use? How best to rotate? How to, most effectively get these players into a position where they're playing as a team? And I think Liam's right. It did seem to be coming together slightly under Pochettino towards the end of last season. But Maresca seems to have found a framework and a clear plan in the way that Pochettino struggled to for a lot of last season. And you start to look at it and say, he's been a really good appointment, really savvy appointment. Doesn't seem like the job is in any way too big for him. And actually, as time goes on, I'm looking at more and more of the signings and thinking Chelsea have signed good players. And I think we knew that they'd signed quality players. The question was always whether somebody was going to be able to knit it into a proper unit and a proper team that worked. And Maresca seems to have reached that point.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Phil. And I think what's been really interesting from a small caption size in sample size, I should say, in the Premier League is that he's conducted himself with authority as well. And, journalists have thrown a lot at him and he seems to have come out of it looking like someone who is in control. Can you take us back into sort of what he's like with the players, Liam, if you have any insight, how he conducts his training sessions, how he connects with these players? Because, it's very hard sometimes for new managers to come into a club, especially one as unstable as Chelsea at this moment in time, and get those ideas across clearly. And we see the progress on the pitch.
Yeah, I think Chelsea would probably take issue with the idea that it's unstable. I think they would say it's probably been stable for about a year now. Okay. But there's still that perception of dysfunction to a degree on the outside, and he did inherit some issues in terms of, as Phil says, finding a hierarchy had started to emerge last year in terms of players. It was already clear Cole Palmer was the man. Nicholas Jackson had emerged as a very good number 9. Moises Caicedo had really begun to hit his stride second half of the season. There were a few things, but there was a lot to sort in terms of the football side, and there was a lot in terms of circumstances in those early weeks. You had the Enzo Fernandez situation after the Copa America, which no one could have foreseen. Chelsea couldn't have foreseen it. It happened like really far away from the club, but had profound implications, not just for the club, but for the dressing room. That was something that Maresca had to handle immediately. And there were questions, I think legitimate questions, for how he immediately handled that. But the only thing that really matters from a coach's point of view is it working now? Is the dressing room united? Is Enzo Fernandez performing? I think the answer to both of those questions is yes. And then you have all the ownership stuff, which came to light at the start of September. Again, something that has nothing to do with Maresca, but he has to answer questions on: have you spoken to the owners? Which ones have you spoken to? You know, what's your knowledge of this situation? And I just think he's handled everything really well, and that's without even mentioning the bomb squad. You know, what was happening in the last weeks of August, the way Chelsea were handling certain players that they wanted out. He always owned decisions about players on a football level as a coach. And I think he managed to strike the balance between being a good company man, which is one of the ways that Pochettino often fell down. I mean, consciously chose to fell down a lot in the second half of his season, while not coming across as weak, while not coming across as a puppet for anyone above him. You know, he does seem strong-willed and his own man. He's certainly not being told who to pick. You know, he takes Enzo Fernandez out, he brings him back in when his form has recovered, and he's got a better role for him, and you see the fruits of that. So he's been really impressive off the pitch, and that's not even really to mention the fact that in games, Chelsea have so often made changes, and did again against Tottenham, made changes at half-time or with substitutions, or just in terms of tactics that have been really smart and actually changed the momentum and helped them keep building these positive results. And that's all to Maresca's credit. The fact that he's done all of this without ever managing in the Premier League before, having one season as a head coach, and going from a club which, you know, all due respect to Leicester, they were the big guns of the Championship, but it's a completely different level of scrutiny and day-to-day pressure at Chelsea. And he just seems to have taken all of it in his stride.
Yeah. Well, we talk about where they are in the league right now. We talk about positive play, Phil. And you look, I'm just a football fan. It's hard not to say they're in the title race, right? But that's constantly being played down by the managers and the players. For example, you know, Levi Colwill, talking to Sky Sports after the win over Spurs, was saying, you know, when we're ready to push for a Premier League title, we won't be 2-0 down in the first 10 minutes. And that was referencing, obviously, the match against Spurs. That's the level we need to be at. And that's what we need to keep working on. It's surely too early, Phil, to predict them as title winners, but surely they have to be in the conversation, at least.
Well, I would turn Colwell's comments on their head by saying 2-0 down at Spurs and turning that around to the point of being 4-2 up and home and hosed is the sign of a very, very good team. And I think more to the point, when it went 2-2 on Sunday, you kind of knew Chelsea were going to win that game. You knew that Spurs didn't have an awful lot left in them. And I look at Chelsea more and more, and I just see a group of players who are absolutely having themselves at the moment. It really, really confident. They obviously like the way this is going. They like Maresca's coaching and his system. It's a weird system, weird season, because nobody seems to want to be in this title race. Liverpool are giving it the, too early, despite their league position. Chelsea are as well. I do kind of understand it from the point of view of both clubs, because I don't think either expected the table to look as it does at the moment. City are kind of giving you the vibes that it might not be their year and that there's rebuilding to do. Arsenal just can't quite get on a roll at the moment, but are still there and still very much in the mix. somebody has to win it. And I think it has already shaped up to give us an impression of the group of 4 clubs that winner is going to come from. All I would say is that I think if Liverpool's challenge proves to be sustainable, then I don't see much reason why Chelsea shouldn't either. And I do wonder whether actually there's a little bit more depth at Chelsea than there is at Liverpool. If things get stretched, if Maresca loses players at key points, he probably has a little bit more to reach for than Arne Slot does over at Liverpool. And it's very hard to see big glaring weaknesses in this team. I'm not saying they're perfect, and I'm not saying defensively they're absolutely spot on, but I do think the midfield is functioning so much better than it was last season. I think Maresca has nailed that area of the pitch to quite a large degree. And he's also got himself into a position where Cole Palmer isn't just a bit of some light in the general gloom about Stamford Bridge. It isn't a case of, well, this is dreadful, but look at what Cole Palmer's done again. Palmer is as effective and as influential and important for them as he's ever been. But what's going on round about him is starting to look really productive as well. And that is why they're developing into a really good side.
Yeah, there's 2 things I want to ask you, Liam. Firstly is those deficiencies that Phil's talking about, where can they fix it up? But just before that, you've been watching Chelsea now for a long time, especially over the last few years where things have been a bit turbulent. What is it like now watching this Chelsea team? Are you thinking the wheel's going to fall off at some point here because you're sort of scarred by what you've seen over the last few years? Or are you buying into this sort of like movement where you're seeing positive football? You're looking at players who seem to know what's going on, a tactical nuance there from a manager that's adding and taking away things for each game and adapting. Are you confident in what you're seeing?
It does feel like there's a lot more game-to-game consistency in terms of what they're doing. What changes is the personnel that Maresca goes with and the way that he arrives at that final shape on the pitch that he wants. He wants this 3 defenders, two midfielders, or 2 defensive midfielders, 2 attacking midfielders, a kind of box, and then 3 attackers. But he gets there in so many different ways. Sometimes it's the left back inverting, sometimes it's the right back, sometimes they're going into the defensive midfield, sometimes they're jumping in at number 10, as Mark Cucurella did in the second half against Spurs. There's just a lot of flexibility from Maresca, and it feels like the players now are familiar enough with it where they're not always executing it perfectly for 90 minutes. They do make mistakes, and that's why they haven't kept that many clean sheets this season. But they know it well enough now that there's a more recognisable identity from the Premier League team and the Conference League team, even though in many cases they're entirely different teams. And that's one big change from the last 2 years. I mean, 2022-23 was a write-off because you had 3 different coaches and it was just a complete mess. Even under Pochettino, you didn't know what you were going to get from game to game because there wasn't the same kind of structure. I think a lot of these players, they've benefited from having that year together, so they were still learning, and it often felt like they would raise or lower their game to the standard of the opposition. They had some of their best games under Pochettino against the biggest teams and some of their worst against teams that they really had no business being in a competition with. This year, they've done a much better job of taking care of business against the teams they should be beating. And I think that's a credit to a more structured approach where everyone knows where they need to be. But Maresca's managed to do that without falling into the potential pitfall that quite a few people, I think, including maybe us in pre-season, flagged up of, will he inhibit Cole Palmer? You know, this guy who's completely energised Chelsea's attack, will he be able to express himself fully? And he has been. He's just doing it in a more structured environment, but he's still empowered to do the things he does best. Maresca knows that Palmer is the queen on his chessboard, essentially, and he's used him really cleverly. There's a great piece on The Athletic from Michael Cox, which looks at this. That. So interesting. He's moved him around the pitch based on different opponents to allow him to impact games. So I think there's this blend of player empowerment, but also a system and a structure that allows Chelsea to be a bit more consistent, even if they're not quite perfect yet.
Attacking-wise, we seem happy. Midfield-wise, we seem very happy. Defensively, though, I mean, injuries there for sure, but still a bit of tweaking there, you reckon?
Yeah, I think the midfield balance is like an evolving thing, and that has implications for the defence. So early in the season, Enzo Fernandez was being used a bit more at the base of midfield alongside Moises Caicedo, and Fernandez is not really good enough defensively to make that viable. Caicedo needs a bit of support, and in the last couple of games we've even seen Caicedo start at right back so that he can then invert into midfield, and you have this Caicedo-Lavia axis which has kind of stabilised things in some ways for Chelsea. The defence, I think they've benefited in terms of the way they play out from Maresca having quite a consistent selection. So until Wesley Fofana got injured, you could largely predict, well, you could certainly predict the centre-back pairing, but largely predict that whole defensive unit. They do still make mistakes playing out, and Robert Sanchez is still not really convincing anyone at Stamford Bridge that he is the long-term solution as a goalkeeper. I think there are quite a few people who would still like to see Philip Jorgensen given a bit more of a run just to find out what Chelsea have in him.
Does that include Maresca, Liam? Because Maresca's been actually quite defensive of Sanchez and kind of stood by him every time I've seen him quoted on him. But the general kind of vibe around Sanchez seems to be that if Chelsea were needing to upgrade in one position or to change in one position, like you say, they have got others in the squad, then he'd maybe be the one.
It's hard to know Maresca's true thoughts on Sanchez, but everything that he's said and done publicly has been full-throated backing of Sanchez. Every time Sanchez misplaces a pass or makes a mistake, you'll see Maresca up off his seat, hands over his head, clapping really loudly for everyone to see, even if Sanchez is being assailed by groans from the crowd. Because I think regardless of whether he believes Sanchez is Chelsea's long-term goalkeeper, he has to project that confidence, because otherwise he's got a decision that he has to make immediately. And I think he doesn't want to have to make that decision. This is just my view on it from the outside. He doesn't want to have to make that decision, because then if Jorgensen comes in and has similar issues, you've already kind of burned one goalkeeper, and you can't do that again, really. It's a very delicate one, I think, with goalkeepers in particular. They need to feel that confidence from their coach, especially if you're asking them to make the kind of decisions with their feet that Sanchez is consistently being asked to make. I mean, Maresca said some of the same things last year at Leicester about Mads Hermansen. I've seen some of the quotes. Like, the only thing I'll take him out of the team for is if he kicks long. That's basically what he says. So he's very, very keen to keep striking that note. But I think if things continue the way they are, it's very hard to believe that it's not a position that Chelsea will be looking to upgrade in the transfer market at some point.
Okay. Enzo Maresca saying Chelsea will dominate English football over the next 5 to 10 years because of this youthful squad, Phil. And according to Transfer Market, the average age of Chelsea's squad is around 23 years old, which is the youngest in the league. Is there some sense to his claims?
What you're saying is that every player there is half as young as me.
But not far off either, mate. Don't you worry.
It's hard to know, isn't it? I mean, it's like chips on black for Chelsea, and we will see further down the line whether they win out on this or the people who think that the transfer strategy won't prove to be savvy, astute, whether they win out. But two things I would definitely reference here. One was the recent deal sheet that The Athletic ran, which Liam will have had a hand in, which was essentially saying that Chelsea are pretty happy with the lot now. There's been a lot of churn in the squad. It's kind of been like buy, spend. But I think I'm right in saying that it sounds like it'll be a really quiet January. And even beyond that, I kind of wonder how active Chelsea will be if this season goes as well as it's gone to this point. And I think it gives you the impression of a club who've spent a couple of years trying to get themselves into the position they want to be in, have reached that now and have said, right, okay, let's let this ride and let this play out. Let players get games. Let Maresca have a run. Let's see if it all comes together. But also go back to a really good phrase that Liam used about the squad at Chelsea, which was like a portfolio of players. And it does sound a little bit like somebody investing in, kind of stockpiling property. But it is probably the right way to describe it, because you can kind of understand what Chelsea are doing. On the one hand, they're wanting to buy players who are not yet at the peak and can develop, the performance levels can improve. But they're also wanting, I think, to bring in players whose value will appreciate, and who, even if they don't become, established first team players or really key figures at Chelsea, will have a lot of resale value when they move on. They're definitely players who they're going to lose money on, but I think more and more you do start to look at the recruitment and think that they've had some good hits there. I think they've been clever in what they've done. The players they've gone after look to me like sensible signings in the main. There are some that definitely will not work. But I think the idea of a portfolio of players is something that other clubs might start to kind of move towards. Because if you can get enough who play well for you, enough who earn you some resale value, then it's almost like the best of both worlds. And I think the bottom line is, because of the size of the squad and the number of players they have recruited, if it does go well for them, then yes, they are going to be very dominant for a long period of time. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to win everything or win a huge amount, but they should be kind of there or thereabouts.
One player that seems to be doing well under this new manager is Moises Caicedo. Enzo Maresca recently saying that he's at the same level as Rodri and Declan Rice. Now, while one of our readers has written in and said Cole Palmer is a Ballon d'Or waiting to happen. I guess is this one of the benefits of having such a young squad, is that they can grow better with the team and actually grow nicely under a solid structure.
This was always the strategy. I know it looked to some from the outside that Chelsea were just spending like drunken sailors when the new owners came in. But certainly from January 2023, when they got this sporting structure in place and Clearlake really took the steering wheel from that chaotic first window in which Bowley was interim sporting director, and there were lots of reasons why it was very, very difficult for them to navigate the market. They've had a clear direction, which is to identify some of the best young players in the world across all positions, aggressively pursue and sign those players, overhaul the squad in the process, lower the wage bill with a lower base wage, more incentive-based structure, and then allow that talent to develop and see what emerges. I think there was a realism. The word portfolio, I think, is still very, very apt. There's a cold-headed realism behind what Clearlake have done, which is they don't expect all these transfers to work. They genuinely...
But that's like any club. Not every transfer is going to be...
They're not expecting a 100% hit rate. Yeah. And they're looking at it all in the aggregate. So as long as the talent ID is good enough that you have more hits than misses, the model should work. And then it's about getting the football side of it right, getting a coach in who knows how to fit these players together and making a team that is the sum of its talented parts. And it's taken a while to get all of that in place, but we're seeing signs now that it might be. And it's not the most romantic way to build an all-conquering team, and people can have different opinions on whether or not they like it or want it to succeed. But that is all separate, I think, from whether or not it's logical and can work. And I think there are signs probably over the last year, really, when you look at the second half of last season, that Chelsea have signed a lot of good players, and we're starting to see more and more of that affect games on the pitch and turn into Premier League points.
Yeah, Phil, this year, Chelsea have pretty much fielded two different types of squads in the league and then in cup competitions. If they finish in a Champions League position, would that be actually harder to do in your eyes? Are we looking at a summer where they're going to need a really strong team on both fronts, so therefore certain players have to go? Because this surely isn't feasible down the line.
They'll have to take stock. No question about that. I actually like the Conference League. I like the way in which, teams from weird and wonderful places, weird and wonderful names get pitched against clubs like Chelsea with sort of mega budgets. It's a bit of fun. But for a team like Chelsea and for a coach like Maresca, it's actually very easy to rotate in that competition without the fear of taking a shiner. Really, it's not difficult for Chelsea to use second string players and to progress very, very deep into into the Conference League. And, to a certain degree, the same is true of the League Cup until the latter stages. Definitely, if it was the Champions League next season combined with the Premier League, then it's a different proposition. But it's only the proposition that any team who's involved in the Champions League and takes it seriously and thinks they can go, the distance or go far into it, has to cope with. I think, again, there's a good amount of depth at Chelsea to help them with that. I suppose what will have to happen next summer, if this is what they're looking at, is that they'll have to be fairly ruthless and fairly strict in deciding who is actually good enough if we need them on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night against Real Madrid, PSG, Barcelona, Bayern Munich. Who is up to that? I don't think there's much question that the kind of 11 to 18/20 that Maresca is relying on at the moment looks very good and very strong and very capable. But as City have found, once you get injuries and once you start to get stretched, that's when you really find out. But Chelsea do seem to have been forward planning an awful lot with recruitment. And as Liam says, there are a lot of players there, and some good talent as well. So I don't think they'd be perfectly set for it, but I think they'd have a pretty good framework to build on.
Yeah, I don't think it's a culling as such, but I think they'll go into next summer very mindful of the fact, provided of course they make top four, which looks very likely now, that they will need to upgrade the squad again. I don't really expect them to do much, if anything, significant in January in terms of incomings. They didn't last January either. But next summer they'll look at it again, and they've already shown the capacity as an ownership, as a sporting leadership, to be ruthless once they decide that players do not fit into their plans. But the Conference League has been weirdly perfect for Chelsea this season.
I was thinking that
for where this squad is, because a lot of that second string, yes, there are some very high-profile names in it. I mean, Christopher Nkunku, you can see he's almost bored on his way to being named Conference League MVP.
Come off injury,
yeah,
that game time elsewhere, that's great just to see what he's able to offer.
Yeah, and in the bigger squad picture, it hasn't necessarily helped Maresca keep players happy, because I think a lot of those players, Conference League is not enough to keep them happy, but it's at least given them a steady diet of minutes, not always the most competitive minutes, but minutes nonetheless that keep them to a degree of sharpness whereby if an opening comes up in a Premier League game, Maresca knows he can bring in a player who has played in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and is not going to look way off the pace, which I think is sometimes the problem that other clubs can have when they have, and I've seen Chelsea have it before, when they have a clear core of 13, 14 players and then players outside of that who barely ever play. It can create issues in terms of the cohesion of the team if you get injuries or suspensions. They will get less wiggle room next year. They won't be able to give Cole Palmer his midweeks off, which has been an incredible luxury in the first half of this season. And that will also ask new questions of the performance and medical department, which is almost entirely new. Every key hire under Bryce Kavanagh, the Director of Performance, has been hired in the last 2 years. But they have so far avoided the repeat of the injury crisis that really played a huge role in derailing Pochettino last year. The Champions League will add to that minutes load, but I think they will back themselves to adapt to that.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that Maresca's also got to find a fine balance with is putting his arm around these really young players, but also showing that sort of stern, I need you to operate at a better level. You look at what he's done with Noni Madueke, dropping him over his training performance. That is, I wouldn't say an issue necessarily, it's a great luxury to have, but it's a fine balance because you're still dealing with relatively young players who are still figuring out how to apply their trade. Yeah,
definitely. And in the case of Madueke, Pochettino did something very similar last year, called him out publicly about his level, dropped him, brought him back in, and he and Pochettino had a great relationship. All the signs are that Madueke and Maresca have a really good relationship too. He said very positive things about Maresca publicly. So to me, again, that's a sign that Maresca has an instinct for what certain personalities need. You can have the tactical acumen, you can have the ability to organise players on a pitch and change that as circumstances change. But in order to have a long shelf life at a top club, you also need to be able to manage personalities, and lots of them, some of them big personalities. And I know we all often talk about the modern players not quite the same as the personalities of the past.
Yeah.
But I think they're just because the challenges are different doesn't mean they're not there. And Maresca's shown quite a good aptitude, I think, for that emotional intelligence as well as the tactical acumen.
Okay, well, let's finish on this really, because I'm looking ahead to Chelsea's next 7 fixtures actually before they travel to face City on January the 25th. They've got Brentford at home, Everton away, Fulham at home, Ipswich away, Crystal Palace away, Bournemouth at home and Wolves at home. I'm looking at the form of some of these teams. Phil, Liam, please jump in at some point. We talk about how they've played so far, but, you know, Arsenal aren't looking crazily consistent. Liverpool, we're still yet to see what's going on there. You know, a lot of these fixtures, Liam, you'd expect them to be in a good place by the time they play City, who are also looking for consistency, roughly around January time.
Yeah, I mean, it was clear a couple of weeks ago that their 2 most testing Premier League games left were Aston Villa and Tottenham. They've emerged from that with 6 points. So they're in a really strong position now to, if not put themselves really in the title picture, then certainly create meaningful separation from maybe even 3rd, 4th, never mind 5th. And they can put themselves in a position where they have the luxury of looking up rather than down and not playing with pressure, not feeling a target on their backs, but feeling like we're ahead of schedule, let's just see what we can do. And I think that's a really healthy atmosphere for a young group of players and a fairly young coach to be in, where you're not feeling like you're expected to win or teams might overtake you. But they have to continue to take care of business against the teams that they're expected to beat. Brentford at home's been a bit of a banana skin in the last few years for different Chelsea coaches. They've got, I think, 3 London derbies in that run as well. They're rarely straightforward. Palace already got a point at Stamford Bridge this season. So the challenges can emerge sometimes where you don't expect over a long season. But carrying in this level of form and confidence, Chelsea will be, I think, they'll fancy themselves to pick up the points to keep themselves at least where they are in the league. Yeah, it's a relentless fixture list over, that December period, Phil, but they've got to fancy themselves and follow this momentum forward. I mean, because if I always think about, those computer games, like you've got to get to the big boss. The big boss is Manchester City, but the big boss isn't looking that big bossy at the moment.
Well, this is it. It's like Streets of Rage 2, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Beat the main man.
You're showing your age now, Phil. Streets of Rage.
At the end.
What was that?
Sega Mega Drive. Don't worry, Liam. It's all good.
Oh, yeah, don't worry, Liam. You're one of these 23.4-year-olds at Chelsea. Yeah. Unlike me. That's probably, though, what Chelsea need next, isn't it? Is a statement win of some sort against Liverpool, Arsenal, Manchester City that makes everybody think actually this is coming together. I think the next few weeks will, over Christmas will go well for them. And I've been quite impressed by the way Maresca's done little rotations with the team. It seemed like a good decision bringing Sancho in at the weekend. To go back to his authority as well, regardless of what players are like these days, you still need that line in the sand where it's clear who's in charge. And I think he's struck the right balance at making it clear who is running the place without being ridiculous about it and without being egotistical. I think it would be easy with somebody like Cole Palmer to be concerned about, giving him kind of free rein and this fast and loose number 10 position when he plays there. But Maresca is obviously sensible enough to realise that if you do that with Palmer and let him off the leash, he's going to play like he's playing and he's going to score an assist in the way that he is at the moment. So I don't see the league position worsening over the weeks ahead. At some point, a little bit like Liverpool, they'll hit that grueling run outside of the odd, domestic league like Scotland, for example, where Celtic are going to win it every year. Germany, I know we had Leverkusen, but Bayern Munich win it year after year after year. There can't have been a cup competition with a more obvious winner in it than Chelsea this season, with the exception of Fiorentina. I just don't see where any sort of feasible challenges is coming for them. So Liam called it a luxury, and it is. They can almost just process through that on the basis that unless they have a night off or a complete shambles, there doesn't seem to be a matchup for them in the Europa League. So they're a threat, I think. In the summer, again, to go back to that podcast, when you asked, will they finish top 4? And we all said, absolutely no idea. it's very difficult now to see how they don't.
Just on the knowing who's in charge point, what have we not seen this season? We haven't seen players fighting over who takes a penalty. We haven't seen quite as many really stupid bookings.
Yeah.
To the point where Nicholas Jackson actually pulled Enzo Fernandez's shirt back onto his body as he was trying to take it off to celebrate the goal against Spurs. When Nicholas Jackson is doing that, all people, you really know that the arc of maturation is coming along nicely. You know, some of that might be just individual players getting a bit older, getting a bit wiser, and learning how to deal with these things better. But I think you'll, again, also have to credit the environment that Maresca's created and the culture that he's created. They all respect him tactically, but also I think in terms of his authority. And as a result, you're seeing a more serious team.
Okay, well, let's see where we are. January 25th when they play Manchester City. Good chat, gents. Really appreciate your time, Liam, Phil, and also you guys. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.